Well, I have 12 o'clock on my watch, so we do like to try to begin promptly. If there are folks that continue to trickle in, that's no problem. I will let them in as they come, but I did want to just take a moment to welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm going to do just a little bit of an introduction here to the Art Center and to our program before I hand things over to our guest presenter, Jereann King Johnson. So since we have people from so far, I did want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about the Art Center of the Bluegrass. So hello, welcome. You are visiting us in Danville, Kentucky, which is in the central part of the state of Kentucky. We're about 45 minutes from Lexington and a little over an hour from Louisville. We are a nonprofit arts organization, and our mission is to connect people to art, culture, and creativity. We are delighted to have that as our work, and we offer any number of programs for our community. We do art classes, we host artist groups, we do exhibits, special events, all things related to the arts to bring arts to the southern bluegrass region of Kentucky. And we are delighted that you have joined us today. Our program today is part of an ongoing series called Lunch with the Arts. Usually the third Wednesday of the month, but we regularly have artists join us for a noontime presentation about their work. So we've had painters, poets, potters, dancers, singers, architects, archaeologists, anything you can think of for the past 10 years have been part of our Lunch with the Arts program. And this program in particular is connected to our current exhibit, which is The Art of Being Black, Conversation and Experience. This is a wonderful show that is on display through April 17th, and it showcases, celebrates the Black experience here in Kentucky. Right now you're looking at our Grand Hall, which is our main exhibition space, and you can see 2 of 3 related exhibits that make up this larger show. We did a lot of work with an advisory committee and commissioned a number of Black Kentucky artists to create work for this show. And 2 of the pieces in this show, if you're wondering why I'm talking about this exhibit, 2 of the pieces in this show are by a fantastic Louisville painter named Sandra Charles, and you are looking at them right here. We have the Legacy and the Heritage. And what jumped out at me immediately when these pieces came in for the show was the beautiful and vibrant quilts that Sandra featured in her work. And when she talked about her work with us, she described how quilts were such an important piece of the African-American tradition in terms of storytelling, of passing down memories from generation to generation, that they just played such an important role in the community. And these particular quilts, although you can't really see them in the screen share, the white squares have words painted on them that were relevant to the exhibit. So the work in this particular exhibit was inspired by a series of community conversations that we hosted, and the words that you're seeing were words that Sandra picked up on from the conversation. So they were special places, special memories, and they really helped tell the story of Danville's Black community. So that got us to thinking about the African-American quilt tradition, and I sort of cast my net out into the world and said, who could help us dig into this topic a little bit more? And thanks to the wonders of the internet and this modern age, I was connected with my new friend, Jereann King Johnson, who is coming to us from North Carolina. So Jereann is an artist and quilter herself, and she is one of the founding members of the African American Quilt Circle and Heritage Quilters, both of which do a lot of work on preservation and continuing the heritage of quilting and art traditions. So I am going to unshare my screen here in just a minute and turn it over to Jereann. We're going to keep everybody muted just to keep background noise down. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat, and at the end of the presentation, we'll kind of filter through those and I can pass questions along to Jereann. If you are not a super proficient Zoom user, know that you can change the view to either see just this person who's speaking or a few other people as well when the screen is being shared. So I am going to stop my sharing and invite Jereann to share hers. I will mute myself and away we'll go.
Okay, hello everybody. I am so happy that you are joining us this noon here on the East Coast. And I'm excited to see so many familiar names and meet so many new people here. Well, and a lot of folk know quilting is my passion. And what I'm going to do, well, just a little bit of background. I came to meet Kate through the African American Quilt Circle. And that's the group of quilters, a really artistic group dedicated and committed to the craft of quilting. And I have learned so much from that group and from the ladies involved in that group. And one of the founders of that group, Candace Thomas, I think she's on our Zoom here today. And I would just like to recognize her as well. So what I'm planning to do is to talk about three different categories of African American quilt traditions: expressions of family, um, some, I'll show some examples of quilts that deal with history and social justice. And I will also share some quilts that they share various themes. As quilters, we're always looking for inspiration. It could be from nature, it could be from other quilts or other quilters or historical events. So I'm going to share some of those examples as well. So I'm going to get right on into it. And if you have questions, like Kate said, just put them in the chat box. I also sent Kate a couple of links to different topics that I'll be talking about, and she can share, she can put those in the chat box. So as most of you know, I grew up in Southwest Georgia, and I have known quilts all of my life. It was quilts and quilting were really integral to our community. In fact, quilts were seen as symbols of wealth, because if you had quilts, you could, you knew that you could be warm in the wintertime. So that was my introduction to quilts. And so that's just a picture of my hands. And actually what I'm doing there is a tradition called tacking. And in the African American experience, when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, we oftentimes saw quilts that were tacked. It was much quicker than actually doing the quilting itself. And when women didn't have time to really spend a lot of it working on quilts, you know, getting a certain number of stitches per inch, they would result to tacking. My grandmother was a quilter and her name was Pearl. And I'm not able here to advance my screen. I don't know what happened. Let's see how we're gonna do this. We're gonna, I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute, and I'm gonna go back to sharing. And then I will, I had practiced this before, and I don't know why we can't get these images up. Okay, let's see here. Oh, I apologize. This is always such a pain. Um, mm, when these kind of things happen. Uh, Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have to just try this like this. I don't know if it'll work, but I hope it will. This quilt is my grandmother's quilt. And my grandmother, she made quilts for to sell. And a quilt like this, she may have sold for, you know, $10 or $15 back in the 30s and 40s. And the quilt is made with squares. My father used to sell suits, and each suit design would have 3 or 4 different options for fabric. It could be a gray tweed or a black tweed or a brown tweed. And so when those catalogs with the suits in them, when they expired, he would give them to his mother. And his mother would then carefully peel off all of these wool quilt swatches. And that's what she would use for her quilts. And so this quilt is an example of that. And she also, you can see that she did some quilting in this quilt. And the little black and white check pieces, that was a large piece of fabric that she had. And so what she did there in that quilt, which I found very interesting, you see at the top and bottom of that quilt, she used the check and the beige. And then on the side, she did slightly different variations, alternating the checks with solid fabrics. Okay, so we'll just go with it this way. I think it'll work. So that was my grandmother Pearl's quilt, and I watched her quilt, and I watched my mother quilt, and I would also help my mother to quilt as well. I don't have any of my mother's quilts in this slideshow, but I did learn to quilt when I was like 8 or 9 years old, or at least patching, doing the patchwork. So now these are like all expressions of family quilts. And I think with African American quilters, at some point we all try to do something to save or commemorate, you know, family members or family traditions. And this is a quilt made by B. Richardson. And B. Richardson was a member of the Heritage Quilters, and B's mother passed. And when her mother passed, she made this quilt. And she took pieces of her clothes and actually appliqued them on solid pieces of fabric. And at the very bottom here, in that last middle square in the bottom, you can get a sense of who B's mother was. She was a midwife, and you see her little uniform there. I don't know if you see my little hand, but that's her uniform. That's a picture of her mother. And those are 2 of the children that her mother delivered. And so that was B. Richardson's, you know, sort of memorial for her mother. The next quilt that you're seeing is Kathy Alston's, and it's called The Family Tree. Now, oftentimes with quilters, we will span a long, I'm gonna see if I can move this over a little bit, a long time working on a quilt. Can you see that a little bit better? I hope so. And this quilt was started about 20 years ago at a family reunion. And what the quilter did, Kathy Alston Kearney, was she took handprints of all the family members, and she then set them on that tree trunk. And the generations at the very center is Ernest and Virginia, and those were her grandparents. And at the very top were her parents. And each branch of the tree represented by the hands, she can tell you who they are. Like the gold and maroon hand is of her brother, and he was Omega Psi Phi in that fraternity, and their colors are purple and gold. And then these little hands, that was her baby son's hand, and then her daughter's hand. And then the two birds on the ribbons. This was a cousin. This one in the blue calico. That was a cousin who died in the Vietnam War. And then the little hummingbird was a baby who shortly after birth. And then the hands under the bot at the roots of the trees, those are people who passed on before she finished the quilt. So that's the family of Kathy Alston Kearney. And she has some text there. The tree of life was planted on each side of the river. It's from Revelations. The leaves of the tree are for healing the nations. Okay, so we'll move on. And this is a quilt. This is another family quilt. This is my family, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. The pictures on the on this quilt were they were made with we transferred the pictures using like a paint solution. It's a old toxic process, and so over time the photographs have actually faded, but they are on fabric. And the attic window is the pattern that we used here for those quilts. And in the center, you can't really see them, but those are the maternal grandfather, grandmother, and the paternal and maternal grandfathers and grandmothers of my husband. So that's that one. The next quilt is, let's see here. We can share. And this is a quilt, again, made from ties of a family member to first of all, to recycle the fabric and to have that memory of the deceased person there. So that's the fan pattern. And those are ties of my father-in-law. And in the real experience, it was a real healing thing for my mother-in-law to take those ties apart and to wash them and press them and get them prepared to make that fan pattern. Okay, so now we're gonna look at some images of quilts that we see that inspire us to do quilts. So this is a quilt made by Loretta Petway from Gee's Bend, Alabama. And Loretta Petway was born in 1942. And you may know something about the Gee's Bend quilters. They gained a lot of popularity about 20 years ago when their quilts were exhibited in the Cochrane Museum, and they actually went all around the country and the world. And they were seen as like make-do quilts. Gee's Bend is right there in the bend of the Alabama River. And actually these quilters have connections to North Carolina, to Halifax County, North Carolina. They, during that land expansion in the 1840s, when plantation owners were interested in moving west to get more land to farm, this guy, Captain G, he took about 72 enslaved people from Halifax County, that's the next county over from where I live, and they walked all the way to the bend in the Alabama River. That's where he established his plantation. And the descendants of the people, the enslaved people, they are the makers of these quilts. And a lot of their last names are Petways. And that's because when Captain G died, the plantation was in debt, and somehow this guy Petway got hold of the plantation, and so a lot of the descendants are Petways. And if you look here, these are old, some of these are old clothes pieces, but these quilters are geniuses in how they, you know, created an artistic expression for themselves. So what I did when I first discovered them, I was just like blown away. And so I decided that I would try and do my rendition of a G's band quilt. And the whole idea is to just take, you know, what you have and make do. And I started in the center with this quilt. This quilt is made with dyed silk noil fabric. It's kind of a knotty silk fabric. And I know that Candace remembers this quilt, and Pam McMichael also might remember this quilt because I was working on it some time ago. And if you look closely right there in the middle, I actually started tacking this quilt, took all the tacks out, and then decided to quilt it. And so there's a little spiral thing right there, sort of in the middle. And anyway, but yes, I dyed all of these fabrics, and then did like this large log cabin. That's the pattern. That's the approach that I took to this quilt. And then inserted like some smaller pieces in there. Okay. The next quilt, this is not an African-American quilt. It's made by two ladies, two European white women in the next county over, but I'm showing this quilt because it is a very unusual crazy patch quilt. And it was made by a milliner. And so that attributes the circles. They were leftover scraps from her hat making. And her cousin did the embroidery on it, and it was made in 1910. And that is right there in the middle of the quilt. And it's made with velvets and silks. And it's just a stunning, beautiful quilt. And it lives here in the county where I live now. And this quilt, again, it was just a project that we did with the quilting circle. Technique-wise, it's all half square triangles. And that's interesting to me about this quilt. When I put it together, I wanted to do something different with the border. And the border is just continuous, like 9 patches with those little strips there. So there's nothing, I mean, every quilt tells a story. And for this quilt, it's the fabric of all the members in our quilt group. And so we can look at it and say, oh yeah, that's Miss Brule's fabric, or that's Belinda's fabric. And so that's it. But I like what I did with the border there. And again, this is another quilt. This is a quilt that is tacked. And I like the border of this one as well. This pattern is called Love Rings, and it is a it's commonly used in African-American quilts, maybe not in this particular style. It may be the drunkard's path, but all of this is a combination of the circle, the half circle, and the little circle that fits in it. I can't get it. Let's see if I can get it. It's hard for you, I think, to see the pattern here where it's broken down. At any rate, this is all tacked. This quilt is all tacked, and my mother-in-law and I, we made this quilt together. And she, for her, I mean, we tacked it together. For her, it was just a lot of memories of tacking quilts with her mother. So, and if you look at the border there, you can see sort of the pattern of how it's put together. It's made with linen and cotton, and the black pieces are raw silk. And the quilt is, for batting, I use the wool batting, so it's a really warm quilt. Okay, so now we're still on searching for expression. So in the African American quilt circle, a lot of the quilters use African fabric in their quilts. And one thing that I really was drawn to was, how can I take African designs and use them to as inspiration for quilts? And that's what I did here. This is the pattern that I found in a book of African designs. And here is the actual quilt that I made using that pattern. Let's see, I think I have a bigger picture here. And I used what I was drawn to this fabric with these, it's like a little check fabric. And for the back, the person who did the mud cloth, it was slightly off grain, and my internet is unstable. I hope that you all, am I okay?
You're good. We can still hear you.
Okay. It was slightly off when they did the mud cloth, but I refused to cut it. So that's why there's some evenness at the bottom and at the top, but that's all right with me. And then I machine pieced this, but I hand quilted it, and did few little things like in the border and so forth. But that one is called Flash of Spirit African Design #1. That was the first time I had taken a design and used it as inspiration for a quilt. And lots of African American quilters, contemporary quilters, do that. And again, this is a piece of it was an inspiration for a quilt. This is a mat that comes from the Bashango region, and I'm not really thinking of the name of it right now. And anyway, it's made with grass, and again from Southern Africa. And so what I did, I was inspired. I found another design, and I created this quilt based on that on a pattern like the previous slide that we saw. So you can see there, right? And here is the design that I created here. And it's all rectangles, triangles, and parallelograms. It looks a lot harder than it actually is. I just had to figure out the geometric structure. And once I did that, I was good. Okay, so, and that quilt was hand pieced and hand quilted, because I kept trying to get the pattern right. Oh, and then the other thing I did, and doesn't really show up here, there are probably 1,000 French knots. You can see the French knots in here, just as something, to kind of dress it up, add a little something to it. We like to adorn our things when we can. So that's what those little white spots are, French knots. Let's see if I think you can see them a little bit better now. I hope. Okay. All right. So being inspired by, different pieces of art. Okay. So this is one of my favorite quilts. So it was inspired by my love of Zora Neale Hurston. And growing up in Southwest Georgia, in Bainbridge, Georgia, we spent a lot of time reading Black writers, like Zora Neale Hurston and James Weldon Johnson and uh, folk like that. And I love Zora Neale Hurston and her writing. And she has really been an inspiration to me. And so I put one of her quotes here: research is formalized curiosity. It is poking and prying with a purpose. And this is a technique that a lot of us use, where we take an image and use the image to create the structure for the person or whatever it is that we're reproducing. We use a photograph and then enlarge it and draw on it that way. So, but with Zora, this was just a lot of fun. She was a fancy dresser, so the hat is actually made with velvet and the little real chicken feather. And this is a batik fabric here. And her belt is made with velvet and the buckle is corduroy. And Zora Neale was an anthropologist, so she spent a lot of time telling folk tales and old folk remedies and songs from the South and the Caribbean. And so one of the things that I wanted to include was a piece of her research. And this is called the Love Potion. And it's about, taking different things and putting it in a bottle and putting it in a drawer. But it's how to attract, someone that you really would like to have a longer, more deep relationship with. So, and then I used one of my favorite patterns, which is the Grandma Flower Garden. And I used old jeans. I had a bunch of old jeans to make that. And so I put those on the background and then on the forefront here, and use that same sort of 9-patch border approach on one half of the quilt. So yes, this is one of my favorite quilts. But I just love Zora Neale, and I'm so inspired, and I was so glad I could do that. The next quilt, I guess you all recognize this man. When Obama was elected, I think there were probably thousands of quilts created just to bring some attention to the first African-American elected as president. And so this was my rendition of the quilt. And it was part of a challenge that we did with the Heritage Quilters. And the challenge was a piece of fabric. And a lot of quilt circles and quilt groups, everybody gets the same piece of fabric, and the challenge is to use it in different ways. And so this is Mr. Obama, and the fabric was this black and white swirly, stripedy fabric. And so I used it for his face and hands because I kind of felt like it was appropriate, his mother being white and his father being African. And he has on his hair is made with a nice wool, and so is his suit. And I didn't use a real tie for his tie, just a piece of kind of brocadey fabric. And he has on his tie, his flag tie pin, because that was such a controversy. He doesn't wear flag pins. So Mrs. Sproul, one of our members in the group, she said, well, my husband, he has two somewhere, and I'm gonna make sure that we get him on a flag pin. So that is Mr. Obama. And actually this quilt is one of those projects I had to hurry up and finish. And I didn't get a chance to do all I wanted to do because I wanted to, I had images of other African-Americans and Africans and family pictures that I wanted to put on the border of the quilt, but maybe one day I'll get to that. So that's the challenge fabric. And here's another quilt with that same challenge fabric, not as much as in Mr. Obama's quilt, but right here as the scarf. And this quilt is made by Kathy Austin Kearney, and she was inspired by a woodcut of Elizabeth Catlett's, and it was called Sharecropper. And so she used that as the base for this quilt, and she named it Working Woman. Again, she used that same approach that I did with Zora Neale to create this image, Working Woman. Okay, and then let's see here. Let's move on. And again, this is something that I saw, another image. I was really looked at the geometric potential and decided that, you know, I could use it as the foundation for a quilt. This, the black and white images of a Chinese lattice design from a book of 1001 Chinese lattice designs. And so I created that pattern here in this quilt. It may not line up exactly as it is here, but here is the entire quilt. Let's see if we can, no. But that's the quilt. And I used a felt to make the little flowers on the side and at the bottom, you know, just having fun playing with, you know, with the whole idea. And that was a lot of fun. Let me move on here so that we can, and in that same vein, you know, I was looking at these these Asian fiber traditions, and Sashiko, which is a Japanese embroidery. I fell in love with that. I just fell in love and started to create the panels and then include them in little small quilts that I call meditations. And this is meditation number 3. And the Sashiko designs, this is the pampas grass here, and this is the turtle back here. They all are thousands and thousands of year old patterns, and you just embroider them with number 8 thread. And I just knew that was going to happen, and I meant to cut the phone off. Anyway, there are different color threads that I used here. They don't show up that well, but yes, that is the Sashiko. Okay, let's see here. We will show one of Belinda Alston's quilts in a minute. And then this is another Sashiko here, Sashiko meditation number 4. And this pattern is called Forward. I can't really, it's, what is it? It's something forward. I can't really remember. I'm sorry about that. And again, this is the pampas grass, which was one of my favorite ones to do. And I alternated here with, you know, actual fabrics. So forward move, I think it may be called. And let's see here. And then I met Hassie Body, who lives in Granville County and North Carolina. And she did this reverse applique. It's called Taste of Freedom. And this piece was inspired by a little article that she found in the newspaper. And Hassie is a master at reverse applique. And what you do with reverse applique, you take, in this instance, it's a black fabric over a white fabric, over a beige fabric. She actually dyed this beige fabric with walnuts. And you cut away the top fabric to reveal the bottom fabric. And that's how you create the image there. Taste of Freedom is what she called it. And you see how attentive she was to the design of his overalls and his fingers. And she has him standing in these reeds. And I wish we could see the quilting, because she actually has reeds in the background behind him, but I don't think you can really see that. I don't know, but she is an incredible quilter. And she's such an inspiration to all of us in the quilt world. A Taste of Freedom. And so once you reveal the dark fabric, you have to do really tiny stitches to, tie down those broken edges. Okay, so that was Hassie. And when after a while, I said, okay, Hassie, I'm gonna try reverse applique. And then this is what I came up with. I used a purple batik fabric underneath, and that kind of chartreuse yellow on top. And this is a Dinkra symbol from West Africa, the Akan people, and it's the ram's horns. And so mine is nowhere as detailed as Hassie. It was pretty straight ahead. And it's only these two pieces in the middle that are reverse applique. The pieces on the side are just pieced, the border are just pieced. But I think I did okay with it. You know, you can see some of my stitches, but it was just all, in fun and learning. But yeah, the ram's horns. And reverse applique is not something that you see a lot of, period, in the quilt world. And so I was really happy to do that. This is a quilt made by Nora Ezel from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And Miss Ezel, she did a lot of story quilts. She did the Martin Luther King story quilt. She did some biblical quilts. And there is a diary. She wrote a diary, the Diary of an African-American Quilter. And she kept detailed notes about what she did with her quilting. And I saw this quilt of hers in her book, Grandma's Flower Garden, which she used the elongated version for the main part of the quilt and the little pieces on the side. And I fell in love with it. I thought it was just fabulous. And it's one of those quilts that every quilter, will try and make. It's made with little hectagons, and you can see all the hectagons there. And so I straight up copied off of Miss Nora Ezel, and I made my Grandma Pearl's Wildflower Garden. I used this electric neon green and black, and then just used black and white fabrics. And it was a lot of fun. It took a little while to get it done. And it's made with all cottons. It's all hand done and hand quilted, hand pieced and hand quilted. And then I use everything in the quilt is a hectagon. Everything is a hectagon, including all of the little flowers in the flower basket. I had to fussy cut them and use like little roses and tulips and little vine fabric. And then there's some little butterflies, scattered around different places in the quilt, like right over on the border there. And I used a cotton velveteen for the binding, which really kind of sets it off. And I did a little Sashiko stitching all around the edges, but you really can't see that. But just every black and white fabric that I could find. There are some repeats. People always ask, are there repeats? And you know, sometimes when we're looking at it, we look and say, how many repeats can you find? And yeah, that was just a fun thing to do. And so now I'm going to look at some quilts that have to do with history and social justice experiences. This is a quilt that was done. I worked with Portia Hawes to do this quilt. We collaborated on this quilt. And this is her great grandfather, and his name is John Hyman. He was the first African American to represent Warren County, North Carolina, in our state legislative. He was the first representative in the state legislature, and then he also went to the national. He represented North Carolina as a representative right after, and this was right after Reconstruction. He was born in slavery. He was taught to read and write. He was sold to Alabama, ran away several times in Alabama, and after emancipation came back to North Carolina and established a store with his brother. And the sheets here, the little frame pieces are actually ledgers from the store. And it's a lot of history in these ledgers. The different families had a page, and all of the produce, all of the products that he would provide, nails, lumber, he kept a record of that. The churches of Oak Chapel AME Church, he gave the land to the church. And that was the first freedom school in the county. And this is his historic marker. And got that messed up there. Anyway, I better not push that too hard. But that's John Hyman. And again, we use that same technique. Portia's was a home economics teacher. She selected all the fabrics for his suit. Okay, so moving right along, and I'm going to stop in a couple of minutes, but again, historical events, that's what we're talking about, and how quilters capture these moments of significance. So in the South, when between the 1890s and 1940s, there were over 4,000 lynchings of African Americans. And in Harlem, at the NAACP office, when they got word of a lynching, they would put a banner out in front of the office. And this one is this quilt made by Sauda Zara, says that a man was lynched yesterday. So she took the actual banner and put it into this quilt. And I mean, lynching is part of our heritage, unfortunately. But quilters, there's a whole slew of quilts that represent different lynchings and just the whole terror and atrocity of it. This is a quilt that goes with the banner quilt. This was done by Sauda as well. And it has these ghosts on it. These ghosts represent the 5 states where there were the most lynchings: Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, and Louisiana. The name of this quilt is Haunted by Our Heritage. So I would have put a lot of time designing this quilt. The Pledge of Allegiance is there at the foot of the victim. And there is the flag. And at the bottom on the red fabric are these skulls. And you cannot see the fabric here, but it is a fabric of just people, like spectators, you know, dressed up in 40s clothes. So haunted by our heritage. Again, some other way of expressing a historical event. And this quilt, I'm not going to talk a lot about it because I want to save a little time for questions. I can come back, but this is documents the history of a radio station that was in our town, WVSP. And this is a picture of a Rosenwald school in the South. Jesus Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington went all over the South, working in communities to help folk establish schools, like in the 1920s, because Black education was so, there was so much desire for Black education, African-American education, and there were no public schools at that time. So anyway, there's a whole history of Rosenwald schools. And the picture here is captured in this quilt made by Sterling Cheston, and that is the same Rosenwald school. My father taught at that school, and so the quilt captures the history of the school, as well as there's an image of his father in the window there, Mr. Cheston. And anyway, so that's the Rosenwald School. And Sterling did this. He used to go with his father and ride the bicycle down the steps. And so that's what that was about. This is the Black family as a target. And there's just lots of data there, you know, in 2018 about Black families 3 times more likely to be killed by police than whites, Black people were. And, you know, some data on children. Belinda McAlston made this quilt as well. And you can see she created that target there. And then this is the last one here. Or the last 2. This is the back of a quilt. And again, there's some statistics about African-American men and if they're expected to, the expectation that they will go to prison in their lifetime is 3 times greater. And the quilt, if this is true, then we must, you know, do something to intervene to stop that trend. And the quilt is here, Hope in Impossible Odds. That's the front of the quilt. And there's a man behind bars, but there's hope in impossible odds, given the data and the statistics. And the man has on a hat. And the reason he has on a hat, because when my father grew up in the Deep South, in the 20s and 30s, 40s, Black men could not wear hats. And so I put the hat there on the man to make sure that he had a hat on. So that's it. Hope and impossible odds. So that's it for me. And I can stop sharing now and take some questions if I can get back to the Zoom.
Thank you so much, Jereann. That's wonderful. I've got a couple questions people have put in the chat that I'll relay to you. And I wanted to say just a couple quick notes because I know people sometimes start running away in the Q&A session, but number one, stay. We've been recording this. I'm going to put the link up on YouTube and send it out to everyone who registered, so that if you do, I had a couple of people asking if they could share it with their quilt guilds. Also, if you want to try to share, save the chat, you can actually download the chat. I know we put some resources in there. There's a little button near where it says file that you can download. And I'll also put those links in the email that I send out with the recording. And then my last note is that next month on Wednesday, February 24th, our Lunch with the Arts presentation is poetry reading and conversation with Frank X. Walker, who is an Appalachian poet, former poet laureate for the state of Kentucky, and one of the visual artists in our current exhibit. So I hope you'll join us again in a month, but now we still have time for some questions with Jereann. Somebody asked about how can you continue to enjoy a heritage quilt if you've got this wonderful family heirloom and it seems a shame to keep it folded up in a closet somewhere. Did you have any ideas for, preservation or sharing with family members, or even if you ever considered deconstructing one and giving pieces to a family, or kind of how do you continue to enjoy something that is so rich in history?
You just look at it every once in a while. You share it at shows, share it with different groups of folk. That's about it. I have not done that. I have not deconstructed any. I could. There's no way I could take my grandmother's quilt apart. No, but yeah. Hey, Betsy.
Somebody else asked if you had a favorite size quilt to make, if you had a preference for the sort of size that you go in, or is that dictated by the design, or how do you approach that?
It's kind of dictated by the design. It's interesting that you asked that. Quilts do that make like a story, a narrative. They can range in size. It doesn't matter. It can. I have some that are pretty big. I'm working on one now that is really big because I'm into this embroidery. So I have the quote on the side, and so yeah, I don't have it just depends on what moves me. But I do like quilts that I can cover up with. They don't all have to be big though. Just as long as that, a lap quilt, a bed quilt. Now, and going back to that first question, what I do, like I have a lot of quilts, like I'll roll them up into a circle and I'll put them on my sofa, and I'll put them like on my bed too, just like line the rolled up quilt. So I can see them, enjoy them. Yeah.
Wonderful. Does anybody else have any questions? You can put it in the chat and we can relay it, or we're certainly so grateful. Thank you, Jereann, for sharing this presentation with us. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. It was delightful to have you all. Thanks for being so active in the chat. That was great, given that feedback that you were enjoying. So we appreciate that.
Well, I really enjoyed it. Thank you. On there, I see that Sauda is with us too, and Candace. So thanks to everybody though for joining us today. And I know there are probably some other folk that I'm missing, but this was really great.
And if there are, anybody who's in the sort of crowd there, if you are a quilter yourself, feel free to drop us an email, respond to your, the reservation email that you got. We keep kind of a list of artists and we can add you to notifications. We've had quilt shows at the Art Center in the past, so we'd love to stay in connection with you as artists. And somebody asked what quilt group you're part of, Jereann.
The Heritage Quilters here in Warrenton, North Carolina, and the African American Quilt Circle, which is in Durham, North Carolina. And they're also, Kate, were you able to put those links in there? One was to Sashiko, and then the other was, I think I included one for a op-ed that I wrote on a 1921. I'm not sure if I did that or not. I meant to.
Let me see. I put the links that I shared were Sashiko, Nora Ezel, and the G's Bend Quilters. But
okay,
if there's any others you want to send out, let me know and I'll put them in the email that goes out.
Okay, then I will do that. All right, then. Well,
Perfect.
Thanks everybody. It's 1 o'clock. And
all right, perfect timing. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day.
Oh, there's Pam. Okay.